If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, Thorin said, it would be a merrier world. I realize this now, even after we have lost so much. Bilbo looked his last upon his remaining allies that he had come so far with, now only to leave them at the gates of Erebor to turn westwards, towards the Shire. Thorin stood at the front of his company of 10 other dwarves. Farewell, Master Burglar. I must thank you for all that you have done since that fateful night in the Shire. Without you we would not be standing upon the threshold of our home now, and I might have lost myself in the Arkenstone or to the dragon. Had it not been for you, and Fili and Kili, I may also be buried with my ancestors now. The mention of Fili and Kili stung Bilbo's heart, as the painful memory of their passing was still fresh. During the Battle of the Five Armies, some few days before, Bilbo had rushed to regroup with the company of dwarves as soon as the dwarves emerged from the guarded mountain. The hobbit fought alongside Fili and Kili, defending King Thorin as the dwarf regained his honor in the battle. Thorin was struck upon the ground by some orcs, and Fili and Kili gave their lives to defend Bilbo as he hauled the dwarf king back into the mountain. This had not been an easy task for Bilbo, as Thorin was heavy in his armor, and there were a few moments when Bilbo was almost hit in the head with rocks. However, once he was out of plain view of the other Free Peoples, Bilbo put his magic ring on, and though he was invisible, he was also given a strength that helped him bring Thorin into Erebor. The eagles came, and their aid was enough of a distraction to buy Bilbo the time he needed, and so the preceding days were filled with both merriment and sadness. The Free Peoples had won the battle, and Thorin was saved, but none of them would forget the cost. It has been a true honor, Bilbo said, suddenly coming back into the present moment. The hobbit bowed with tears in his eyes, and with the Grey Wizard and the host of Thranduil, Bilbo was off, headed home. Thorin called out after him, If you or your folk ever have need of us, Mr. Baggins, we shall be there. Bilbo turned with a smile and waved. The dwarves watched them go for a time, until the king turned and declared, There is work to do, for the glory of our ancestors and Durin himself. Erebor shall be rebuilt, and the dwarves shall be made strong once again. Before Thranduil and Bard had left the outskirts of the mountain with their people, the Arkenstone was finally returned to Thorin as he was a changed dwarf after the battle, and in payment, Thorin gave 1/14 of Erebor's treasure hoard to the men of Laketown, so that they may build anew. Bard was also given the necklace of Girion, and like he did in the original timeline, Bard gave the emeralds of Girion to the Elven King Thranduil. These tradings helped form new alliances between the dwarves, elves, and men, and these alliances would continue to come into play over the next many years. And so, King Thorin II Oakenshield led his dwarves and those who hailed from the Iron Hills and stayed in the Lonely Mountain as they began to rebuild Erebor. They would make it stronger and grander than before, with greater defenses than it had known in the days before Smaug's attack. The dwarves would be inspired by their king, and the presence of the Arkenstone in the rebuilding process. Thorin was 195 years old at the time that Erebor was reclaimed from Smaug, and those many years of his life taught him much that would carve his fate. He ruled sternly but wisely, as he had seen how easily greed and the Arkenstone could affect his mind, and those of his kin. He did not rule alone either, as he often turned to his friend, steward, and heir, Dane Ironfoot, who had been present in the Battle of the Five Armies, and in the days after, wore these titles, as Kili and Fili had once been the heirs. Due to their great friendship, Thorin and Dane bonded the Ironhill dwarves and the dwarves of Erebor so much that the two realms of the Khazad were closer than the folk of Nogrod and Belegost had been in the First Age. Under Thorin's leadership, the next 60 years in Middle-earth, after the events of The Hobbit, would lead to prosperous growth and expansion for the Free Peoples. Thorin was seen as a living legend and a hero, one who could inspire dwarves and others alike. The tradings of the Arkenstone, the necklace and gems of Girion, and the treasure of Erebor fostered new socio-economic ties, and the newly reconstructed Dale became a place of commerce once again, as it was home to trade between elves, dwarves, and men in the north. Due to the fact that Thorin still lived, these alliances remained strong and developed over time, even as the kingship of Dale passed from Bard to Bane, and from Bane to Brand. And so, the dwarves of Erebor had the resources to expand their kingdom by building new colonies and reclaiming old ones. King Thorin sent expeditions of dwarves from Erebor and the Iron Hills into the Grey Mountains to reclaim Dane's halls from the cold drake that took it many years before. Those same dwarves would go on to secure Mount Gundabad as well, while other dwarves were sent to the Uruk-Karni, or the Red Mountains in the far east, to establish connections with any of the dwarves that lived there. Another group of dwarves also went to the Dwarven Halls in the Blue Mountains to continue building there. Each colony would have a lord that ruled in the name of the king. These lords would be the members of Thorin's company, and the members of the company that were not given these stations would be Thorin's personal advisors of different subject matters in Erebor. Thorin would also send some dwarves as emissaries to Minas Tirith and Rohan for new politico-economic alliances. Because Thorin was beloved by many dwarves, these colonies and alliances would work together and continue to be united. With their newfound halls, resources, and population growth, I believe that in the 2990s of the Third Age, Thorin would send his good friends Balin and Oin with a large company of other dwarves to enter Khazad-Dum. However, Thorin knew that his advisor Dane had seen Durin's Bane during Azanulbizar, or the Battle of Moria, so he commanded the Dwarven Company to act with all stealth that they could muster, and establish 2 small encampments on the western and eastern sides of Moria. Thus, the company would split into 2 parts, and one would enter through the eastern gates, while the other crossed the mountains and entered the doors of Durin. Even though these 2 small establishments would not reclaim Khazad-Dum, it'd be the first step in the right direction, as the dwarves could slowly defeat the orcs and goblins within Khazad-Dum without awakening the terror that slept inside. And if worse came to worse, Thorin instructed Oin, who would go to the west side, and Balin, who would go to the east side, to lead their dwarves quickly out of the doors behind them and leave their encampments behind. Indeed, this would work better than Balin's expedition in the original timeline. Although Oin's dwarves would have some trouble with the Watcher, both dwarven encampments would be able to hold their ground and expand further into Khazad-Dum without awakening Durin's Bane. And so, we are brought to the events of the Lord of the Rings. By this time, Thorin would be about 255 years old, but he would still be holding on to his life for some years to come, as the dwarves had very long lifespans. His colonies would flourish, and parts of Khazad-Dum would even be reclaimed, all because his legend united the dwarves of the world. The strength of the dwarves would be nearly unparalleled at this point in comparison to the other kingdoms of the Free Peoples, and their might would prevent Sauron's forces from taking hold in northern Rovanion during the War of the Ring. The messenger sent from Mordor asking after Bilbo and the One Ring would be immediately captured by the dwarves, and that would start Sauron's attacks on the north earlier than in the original timeline. Thorin would send Gloin, Gimli, and other dwarves to the Council of Elrond, like in the original timeline, and Gimli would also lend his strength to the Fellowship of the Ring. However, in this timeline, the dwarves had a more active role in the War of the Ring. Oin and Balin's dwarves would help the Fellowship find their way through Khazad-Dum, but the movement across the kingdom would still awaken the Balrog. After the defeat of Durin's Bane by the hands of Gandalf the Grey, the dwarves would work to free Khazad-Dum altogether. Looking now elsewhere, the dwarves, elves, and men would not only hold the north against Sauron's Easterlings, but they would push Sauron's forces back all the way to the Ash Mountains on the north side of Mordor. Dol Guldur would be held by the elves of Mirkwood and Lothlorien, while the dwarves and men of Dale joined Aragorn's forces at the Battle of the Black Gate in 3019 of the Third Age. The Battle of the Black Gate would have been less of an urgent situation for the Free Peoples, as Thorin himself would have commanded the dwarves of the world from behind the battle, lending new dwarvish military strategies to the Free Peoples. Frodo, Sam, and Gollum would complete the destruction of Sauron and the Ring, and thanks to the dwarves and men of the north, far less casualties would have been had in the last battle against Sauron. Aragorn would be crowned king, and some of the dwarves would stay with Gimli to reshape Minas Tirith after its siege. These same dwarves would afterwards follow Gimli into the Glittering Caves to establish a new dwarven settlement in the caves of Aglarond. Besides all of this, Durin's folk, under the command of Thorin, would also prevent the scouring of the Shire. After the Battle of the Five Armies, when Thorin told Bilbo that the dwarves would be there if he or his kin ever had need of them, he meant it. The dwarves who lived in the Blue Mountains had reported brigands and ruffians coming in and out of the Shire, as the dwarven traders and messengers crossed the Shire and noticed this. And so Thorin set a watch on the bounds of the Shire, stretching their guard even to Bree in the east, and these dwarves would defeat Saruman's forces that went into the Shire, saving the hobbits from enslavement or worse. And so, the dwarves that helped save the world on many occasions would follow their king Thorin, who was now renamed Durin VII, into the Fourth Age, as the reunited dwarven kingdoms prospered for years to come. Durin VII would eventually pass away within the first few years of the Fourth Age, never having another heir besides Dain and his son, Thorin III. Thorin Oakenshield would have had a long life, longer than the average lifespan of 250 years in fact, but Thorin I's blood flowed through his veins, and for all of his accomplishments, he had his own strengths, and the influence of the Arkenstone to thank. Indeed, throughout all of these events, the dwarves had the Arkenstone out in the open to motivate them to achieve greater feats, as in the original timeline it was actually buried with Thorin. And I believe that the Arkenstone, along with the leadership of Thorin, would have led the dwarves to do some incredible things. And so, the unified dwarves were strong, following the kin of Durin VII for many generations to come. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this theory video. If you did, please hit that like button and share this video with a friend. I believe that if Thorin had lived, the dwarves would have taken a more profound role in the events of the late Third Age, and I think that this is actually one theory where less evil events would have taken place in Middle-earth, had it happened. I also do believe that the influence of the living legend of Thorin and the Arkenstone itself would have inspired and unified the dwarves of Middle-earth to an extreme degree. But what do you all think? Would the events of Thorin surviving the Hobbit go like this, or would something entirely different happen? Please let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to contact me more directly, please be sure to join us on Facebook and Twitter through the links in the description below, and don't forget to subscribe to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. I will see you all again next week with a long overdue video on the rise and fall of Numenor. As always, thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.